Hello everybody, this is going to be a quick video in which we go over some of the models that have been used to understand aggression. Alright, so I'm going to share my screen with you right quick. Alright, so one of the very first models that was developed to understand aggression was the frustration aggression model. And the frustration aggression model grew out of one of Freud's ideas known as catharsis. This idea that if we don't act out some impulse or we don't express some desire, then it builds up and it'll eventually be released. So we engage in an act to release that energy, and it supposedly, according to Freud, allows that energy to go on, and that makes us, that releasing feeling is a good feeling to us. That's a feeling of catharsis. Well, the idea behind the frustration aggression model is that when we face some kind of act or some event that interferes with our ability to accomplish our goals, then we get this frustration that builds up, and to release that frustration, we aggress. Okay. Now, some things do moderate how much aggression comes from a frustrator. For example, proximity to goal completion. If you're closer to accomplishing a goal, then when something frustrates your goal pursuit, the chances of inciting more aggression are higher. So if you think about, you're in college, right? And let's say you fail a class in your first semester. Well, you're so far from your goal that, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be very upsetting, but it's going to be less upsetting than had you failed a class, let's say, in the final semester of your senior year. All right. Well, why? Because in the final semester of your senior year, you're very close to being done. You're very close to goal completion. And so if something frustrates your efforts there, it's even potentially more harmful. And so it's thought that more frustrating and therefore triggers more aggression. Another moderator, is the extent to which you expect to be frustrated. All right. So if you walk into something not expecting any kind of frustration, then a unexpected frustrator can be more frustrating and therefore more likely to trigger aggression. So these are some of the things that the frustration aggression hypothesis and research examining that basic idea and similar ideas has led us to understand. Now, the thing about the original formulation of the frustration aggression hypothesis is that it argued that all aggression was the product of frustration. But this isn't necessarily the case. Yes, a lot of aggression is provoked by some frustrator, but it's not as universal as the original model supposed. So in more recent years, we've developed more advanced models with which to understand aggression. For example, the general aggression model is one of the most prevalent models today. I believe Bushman and Anderson are the folks who have proposed the general aggression model. And to this day, if you're reading a paper about aggression, you're probably reading a paper that either is written by or cites a lot either Anderson or Bushman. Now, you can see an image there that depicts the process of aggression. We're going to focus primarily right on this bottom box here, though. All right. Basically, all this top box is telling us that there are biological factors and certain environmental contexts that can influence our personality, which is a fairly stable thing, at least in adulthood, and that personality can then change person factors and situation factors. But let's focus right here on this aspect of the model. First, the general aggression model holds that whether we aggress or not is the product of a system, all right, of factors that play together in this complex system, and ultimately how these how these factors influence or lead to our appraisal of a specific situation can influence, and then whether or not we can correct for the appraisal that we are automatically inclined to make, can influence whether we aggress or not. So let's start from the beginning up here. All right, what they call inputs. Sorry, I don't know why I pointed to routes when I said inputs, what they call inputs. So let's focus first on person factors. These are any aspects of the person, any qualities they have that, sorry, my wife was asking me a question. These are any qualities intrinsic to the person that might influence the way they think, the way they feel, or how worked up they are. So their arousal. Arousal is how worked up you are. And so these things can include things like long-term goals, unstable self-esteem. I have another video in which I talk about unstable self-esteem and narcissism. Be sure to check those out. Attitudes towards violence. So, for example, in certain subcultures, such as the culture of honor, I also talk about this in another video. Check that out. In certain subcultures, violence is an acceptable way to deal with problems. As in the culture of honor. If someone offends your honor, offends your reputation, then in cultures of honor, it's not only permissible, sometimes it's expected to aggress. So for example, you might hear things like, if someone insults your, as hearing parents talk to their boys, because I grew up in an honor culture, if somebody insults your sister, you take care of them. You need to take care of that, right? That's instilling a culture of honor. All right. Also, aggression-related skills. When we are better capable to aggress, all right, aggression becomes a more viable option. Okay, so these are some of the person factors, the dispositional abilities, intrinsic qualities to a person that can affect the way a person thinks, cognition, feels, affect, or how worked up they are, arousal. You also have situational factors, and there are many, many, many situational factors. Here is a little list, all right? Frustration, all right? So part of the frustration aggression model, anything that frustrates you could, again, a frustrator would be in the environment. Those frustrators can influence the way you think, feel, and how worked up you are to potentially influence your appraisal and whether or not aggression is warranted. Social stress, all right? We see both in individuals and in groups that as stress rises, as tension, as concern, as worry rises, aggression in the individual or group also rises. Interpersonal provocation. Somebody threatens, insults you in a way in front of other people, right? That can threaten your status, all right? Somebody's behaving hostilely to you, right? Somebody getting up in your face, right? That's an interpersonal provocation. Somebody rejects you, flat out, just dismisses you, right? That can be, that is an interpersonal provocation that can influence people's aggression, all right? Exposure to aggressive models. I have a lot of gaming friends, and not all of them are scientists. And so I hear very frequently the notion, well, violent media doesn't do anything. Well, no, it actually does. In fact, at this point, we've got going on 40 years of research, not only correlational research, but experimental research showing that violent media does tend to increase aggressive tendencies and sometimes increase the chances of aggressive behavior. Does playing a violent video game mean that you're going to walk out the door and go punch somebody? No, but it can increase the chances that if you're provoked, you will respond with punching. And I have a whole different video on how violent media can increase aggression, so I'll leave that. I'll point you in the direction of that video to check out more about that. Discomfort, all right? I also have another video about how discomfort can increase aggression, but in general, when we are uncomfortable, we're more likely to aggress. Okay? Aggression cues, all right? Simply the presence of things related to aggression can increase the chances that we will aggress, all right? they can increase the thoughts that we have about aggression, our feelings, and how worked up we are. So, for example, the presence of guns has been shown to increase the chances that a person will aggress. All right, we call this the weapons effect. So simply having a gun around, all right, will make a person more likely to aggress. War, we see that in times of when a country is at war, interpersonal aggression at the individual level goes up. Interpersonal crime, um, violent crime like muggings, robberies, these all go up when the country is in a state of war. And so we see that these situational cues, seeing these cues that are related to aggression, guns, war, these can increase our thoughts about aggression, which can affect our immediate appraisal. And deprivation, all right, and specifically relative deprivation, because we see that even in America, one of the richest countries in the world, a country where the poor here are often richer than people in most countries on the planet. So the poor here, even though they are, by the rest of the world standards, pretty well off. In fact, they may even be rich in some countries. We still see that interpersonal violence is more common among impoverished areas. All right, and so it's not really an issue of absolute deprivation. It's more of an issue of relative deprivation. So those who are deprived relative to somebody else, and more than likely, they can see the others that they have far less than. Aggression becomes a little bit more likely. All right. So these person and situation factors then influence our internal states. Okay, so they affect the way we think. So the weapons cue, the weapons effect, our country being in war, these things increase the way we think, the hostile thoughts we have. They may even incline us to make hostile attributions, and what I mean by that is we're more inclined to think other people are being hostile, all right, that they're wanting to hurt us. All right, these things can provoke emotion states that are related to aggression, like anger. All right, when we're angry, we tend to make more hostile attributions. We tend to think people are out to hurt us, and these states can make our arousal state go up. So, for example, discomfort. Right, when we're uncomfortable, our baseline arousal state grows, and as is the case with many emotions, when our arousal grows, we tend to try and attribute that arousal to some source. Well, if we attribute it to some obstacle or provoking situation, that the increased arousal can increase the chances of us aggressing. Now, once we think somebody's trying to hurt us, we're angry about it, and we're worked up, we have the energy to affect it, we then make an immediate appraisal. And this immediate appraisal is, when I say immediate, it's automatic. All right, so immediately we make an attribution about, oh, this person wants to hurt somebody, this person wants to hurt me. Now, if we then have the cognitive resources to second guess that initial appraisal, if we have the ability to double check ourselves, are they really trying to hurt us, or did they really mean to hurt us? If we have the resources to do that, then we go through a second cycle. But if we don't, then we tend to engage in impulsive action. And you can see in this flow chart, sufficient resources. What I mean by sufficient resources is sufficient cognitive resources. All right. So if you have sufficient resources, then if you don't have sufficient resources, then the initial appraisal leads to whatever impulsive action you were inclined to do. So if you thought somebody was being a jerk and they needed a good walloping on the, upside the head, then if you don't have the resources, let's say you're drunk, or let's say you're tired, right? If you don't have the resources to give that a second check, give that a second thought, then you engage in impulsive action, which means you'll probably be inclined to aggress. But if you have the mental resources, you're well rested, you're not stressed, you don't have a bunch of things on your mind, then you can consider the outcome of acting on your initial appraisal. And this flowchart's a little confusing, but if the outcome of that appraisal, if you think that appraisal would be satisfying, then you go ahead and act on that initial appraisal. But if you think the outcome is important and acting on that initial appraisal would have an unsatisfying result, then you go into a reappraisal process. You second guess it. You start thinking about, well, should I really do this? Were they really trying to be aggressive? Does it matter? Is it worth it? And so after this reappraisal, you then are more likely to engage in thoughtful action. And so one of the differences you can kind of think of between thoughtful action and impulsive action is impulsive action is more automatic, all right? It doesn't involve a whole lot of higher order thinking, whereas thoughtful action does. Thoughtful action is more of a higher order event, okay? So that's the general aggression model. The last model we're going to talk about today is IQ, all right? And this is a model proposed by Finkel. Finkel argues that whether or not we aggress depends on the 3 I's, right? And the 3 I's there are instigation, impellence, and inhibition. So instigation, what instigates our desire to aggress against someone, right? That could be some frustrating event like social rejection. And then we have certain qualities, right, that might be in us or might be in our environment that impel us towards aggression, right? So we might be, if you check out some of my other videos, we might be high in narcissism, or we might have unstable self-esteem, all right? We might be low in agreeableness, right? We might be high in neuroticism. So we have these traits, right? We might have a history of aggression, right? So we might have learned aggressive models that have taught us that the way we should react to something is by aggressing, right? There might be aggressive cues, we might be somebody being the instigation might happen in a paintball shop, right? Where there's tons of, admittedly, paintball guns, but there's guns everywhere, right? I only bring that up because I'm really hoping to get back into paintball. Love it. Anyway, so all of these traits, this history, this learning history, these aggressive cues, these things impel us. They lead us. They motivate us to aggress. But some of those traits may lead us not to aggress. So we have these things that if we have traits that impel us towards aggression, then we're more likely to aggress. If we don't have those traits, then we're not probably going to be very likely to aggress in the first place. All right. So we have instigation, impellence, and then we have the 3rd I, which is inhibition. So these are forces that lead us to inhibit ourselves, to shut down the aggression. Okay. And so we might talk about situational forces. So we may be in an environment where we know aggressing would not be in our interest, and in fact, it's being very frowned on. So we might be in a church, right? We might be somewhere where there are cops around, right? So these are situations where something in our situation is inhibiting our aggressive tendencies. Okay. We also might have personal inhibition. So if we are high in self-control, then we might be less likely to act on or aggress against whatever instigating force we've faced. And so what we see here is a chart taken from, I believe it was one of Finkel's studies, kind of showing this general relationship. And so what we see here is that as the trigger, the instigator, becomes more extreme, right? So, we might think of a frustrator. So here we have the frustrator being completely absent. Here the frustrator is moderately frustrating, and here the frustrator is extreme frustrating, right? And then on the y-axis here, we have intensity of a person's violent impulses. So how much do they want to aggress? Okay, and so as the line gets higher, they want to aggress more. As the lower the line, the less they want to aggress. And then we have two lines here. We have strong impelling forces and weak impelling forces. And so remember I was mentioning in the impellence, people who have certain impelling traits that, make them inclined to aggress, they're going to aggress more. Well, you can think of those as strong impelling forces. People who don't have those traits as much, right? You can think of those as weak impelling forces. Okay, and so automatically what we see is that the relationship between the intensity of the frustrator or intensity of the instigator and the impulse to be violent is much stronger for the strong impelling forces than it is for the weak impelling forces. All right. Then we have over here, the violence threshold given strong. The top one is the violence threshold given strong inhibiting forces, and the violence threshold given weak inhibiting forces. Basically, what that means is how much of a frustrator does it take to aggress, right? Well, if there's not a whole lot of things holding you back, so the inhibiting forces are weak, if there's not much holding you back, then the threshold before you attack is lower, all right? So even among those with weak impelling forces, they're not typically inclined to be violent. The more they are, though, in an environment with no inhibiting forces, even those with the weak impelling forces, they may still aggress, right? They're passing this threshold. But in an environment where there's strong inhibiting forces, the folks with the weak impelling forces, they're not going to aggress. You see how this dotted line here doesn't get up to that threshold? It doesn't get up to the violence threshold. So when these inhibiting forces are strong, you have to have pretty strong impelling forces to aggress. And even then, it takes quite a bit, a very extreme frustrator. All right, so you can see that when we have strong inhibiting forces, strong situations, strong personal factors that may dissuade us from aggressing, when those strong inhibiting factors are in place, we don't aggress easily. You notice this line here, this dashed line, showing the relationship between the intensity of the frustrator and the impulse to frustrate. It doesn't cross that top line until the frustrator gets extreme. All right, it takes a little bit longer before it will. When there are strong inhibiting forces, it takes longer for people to aggress. All right, you can think of the entire area underneath this line right here. You can think of this entire area as a no aggression, as an aggression-free zone. All right, so and this area above here is when aggression will happen. So even when somebody has strong forces impelling them towards aggression, if there's strong inhibitors, the good money, if you're a betting person, the good money is on them not aggressing. All right, but if there's not strong inhibiting forces, then the good money is on people aggressing, or at least there's a better chance of anybody aggressing, both those with strong impelling forces and those with weak impelling forces. As you can see, that there's a lot of space above this line here. All right, guys, I hope that all made sense. As always, if you have any questions, I hope that you'll send them my way. But if not, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you later.